You wanted Trump to pardon Hunter Biden, but his dad has beaten him to the punch.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have been a very smart move by Trump to send a unifying message to a very fractured and divided America if he was to do it. But for Joe Biden to do it after assuring the world, including the American electorate, repeatedly in the last few months up to the election, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to pardon him. To get the White House press secretary to repeatedly say it from the lectern in the White House, I think that's pretty disgraceful. So there's two ways of looking at this. I think if Trump had done it, smart move in unifying the country. For Biden to do it, actually a pretty shameless act of rank hypocrisy.
Yeah, not a very nice nail in the coffin of what will be probably not a particularly well-remembered presidency.
I think he'll go down as one of the worst presidents. He stayed on way too long, and clearly cognitively he was in decline. I think the botched coronation of his vice president was another fiasco, which came back to haunt them. And I think the problem with Joe Biden is that the whole issue of Hunter Biden and the way he's now pardoned him, he's always positioned himself as the whiter than white candidate against Trump. That Trump's the liar, Trump's shameless, Trump's corrupt, Trump is hypocritical, all these things. That was the stick he repeatedly used to beat Trump. And now in one fell swoop, one action, because it's not just he's pardoned him for the things of which he's been convicted. He's pardoned him for anything else he may have done since 2014 in that period.
It's a decade of crime.
It's like, what else has gone on here? A lot of rumors about much bigger stuff that may have happened. And you look at it and you think, wow, that's the kind of thing that, honestly, they talk about a banana republic relating to Trump. This is about as close to a banana republic act as you could imagine.
Yeah, I want to talk about this on your show later on, but there's this rise of the bro-oligarchy and bro-politics at the moment.
Which is fascinating.
I think it's really interesting, but this prioritization of doing good over looking good, of sort of efficiency over optics. And, this is one of those examples, I think, where both have gone awry, both the thing that you did and the way that it was done and the way that it was led up to. But in stark contrast to Vivek Ramaswamy doing debate prep with his top off, hitting forehands on a tennis court, or Elon Musk, sending rockets into space, sort of a world of people doing things. Even if you don't agree with the things, you can't deny that they're doing stuff. And I wonder what the medium-term future looks like now for America.
Well, I think one of the most important things of the bro-oligarchy in terms of its impact is that so many young men gravitated to it because they've been feeling lost. You've talked about this a lot. I've talked to you about this a lot. I've got 3 sons from 23 to 31. I've seen it firsthand, how they've been struggling, not just my sons, but their friendship group have been struggling to understand what it means to be a man in this weird age that we're now in. Social media driven age, virtue signaling driven age, a weird time when losing is almost more celebrated than winning, where the old alpha male chest beating is now seen as something to be ashamed of, where weakness is almost now seen as a greater characteristic than strength. And I have been on this for years thinking this is a ruinous way for society to go. And suddenly along in America, you have this group of very alpha male guys, all chest beaters, from RFK Jr. to Elon to Trump to Vivek to Joe Rogan, all of them. Very strong-minded guys. To a lesser degree, in a different space, Andrew Tate and his brother, who wield extraordinary influence, but I think have a streak of blatant misogyny in Andrew's case, which I really don't like. But a lot of the reason for his appeal is that lost young men gravitated to him because he was pounding a drum of take care of yourself, be proud of being successful, aspire to be better than you currently are, etc. And that resonates with people. I'd add Jordan Peterson to the
I was going to say, even though Jordan's not a massive fan of Andrew, the message in principle isn't that different.
No, and the message is be proud to be a man again. You've been ashamed of being a man for many years now, since the avalanche of Me Too, of Time's Up, which absolutely had an important role in society in correcting a historic imbalance in the gender, no question, and historically bad behavior by a lot of men towards women. I absolutely do not denigrate either of those movements. But what it did do, as I knew it would do, the pendulum swung so far the other way that actually it freaked the hell out of young guys. And they were suddenly like, what am I supposed to be? How am I supposed to behave? And women listening to this might think, well, it's easy. You know how to behave. Actually, it's not that easy. Particularly if you've been conditioned to think that being a man is X, Y, Z, and suddenly you're told all those things are things to be ashamed of. And now we've had the pendulum swing back a little bit, and you're seeing a sort of corrective balance where I think people have begun to work out where the boundaries are, where the lines are, to a degree. I think it's still complex out there. And you're seeing it at the moment with the whole Greg Wallace scandal in the UK. And, from American viewers, very simply, he's a guy who does a cooking show on TV, who's been very laddish for 20 years or so. And now that laddishness has come back to be used as a stick to beat him. And he said a lot of things which are pretty unpalatable to women who've now ganged up to complain about him. But again, that raises that whole area of workplace banter, workplace relationships, right? I mean, I read that until 10 years ago, 40% of all marriages began with a workplace romance. That stat cannot exist today, because how does it start? Historically, it would be a guy in a superior position with a woman in a lesser position. That's historically because of the gender imbalance in the workplace. So how do people meet now at work? They're not really allowed to. So what happens then? Then you gravitate to dating apps. They're going out of fashion too.
They seem to create a flimsier relationship as well. They drop off more quickly.
Yeah, and that's, you've seen that their popularity is decreasing. So I do think, well, how are people meeting each other actually?
With difficulty.
Yeah.
Elon said cancel culture had been cancelled.
Yeah.
Something you'd been harping on about for a while. You think that's true?
Well, I like the idea of it. I certainly think that when you've got a thumping win for a guy like Donald Trump, who's been helped over the line by people like Elon, like Joe Rogan and others, who simply don't tolerate or believe in the concept of cancel culture, that's incredibly powerful. And I think you send a message to the woke world, and I always temper this kind of part of a discussion about wokeism by saying when wokeism originally began back in the 60s in America, it came out of music actually, and it was a clarion call for people to be more aware of social and racial injustice. By that criteria alone, I'm woke, happy to be woke. It's just the way it's been hijacked in the last 10 years by what I call them fascists. They hate it because they hate fascists. But I say, do you not understand that when you operate on a principle of cancel culture, of virtue signaling, of fact-devoid bullshit about things like supporting trans athletes in women's sport to the point where it just destroys the integrity of women's sport irrevocably, when you pound those drums, actually you're behaving like a fascist, where you want people to think like you, to act like you, to speak like you, to have the same values, to have the same principles, to have the same heroes, to read the same books, to watch the same movies, to laugh at the same jokes. And if you deviate, we're going to destroy you. That's fascism, actually. And they don't seem to either understand that or they're in denial. But this election's a big wake-up call, because I think this election you had Kamala Harris, progressive, pretty far left progressive throughout her entire political career, desperately trying to move to the centre when she became the nominee. But it was all too late because the receipts were there. And the receipts were used against her, memorably in that trans ad that the Trump campaign did, which they reckon moved the needle by up to 3 points, where it simply ended with Kamala Harris is for they, them, Donald Trump is for you. That was very simple, but very effective, because actually personal pronouns are bullshit. And we all kind of know they're bullshit. And now I've noticed on my emails, people have stopped using them because they now realize actually it's made them look a little bit ridiculous, particularly those who insist on calling themselves they. As Joe Rogan said about Sam Smith, there's only one of you, buddy.
Yeah, do you think it's a repudiation of that? Obviously, you've made the claim that wokeism's dead and identity politics is dead and virtue signaling is dead. And
well, I think the concepts are dead. The actual execution of the death may take some time, but I do think that if it wasn't dead, you'd have seen a massive victory for a progressive far left candidate in Kamala Harris, who pretended she wasn't, but actually is to her bootstraps, and she got wiped out. And I think that that's an indication of three things. One, Americans trusted Trump to fix the economy and illegal immigration better than they trusted her to do that. Secondly, There's something about him on the world stage, the swagger that Trump brings to the office, which annoys a lot of people, but is actually quite effective. And I think that was partly in people's minds, particularly when he put his fist up after being shot. He showed the world that the potential president of the United States was a badass, strong guy. And I think that moment may have won him the election when we look back in history to that moment, particularly when he then got back on a debate stage the week later, a rally stage, and did it all over again in front of 20,000 complete strangers. I spoke to him that night. He rang me because he'd seen me talk about it on Fox. And I said, I got to say, whether people love you or hate, that is a badass statement of personal courage. And he was interesting because he actually said in that call, you know, I knew if I didn't get back out there now, I might never get back out there, which I thought was an interesting. You don't often hear Trump.
A little bit of vulnerability.
A little bit, where he kind of knew himself.
Talk to me about what happens when your phone rings and you pick it up and it says Donald J. Trump.
It says DJT, actually, in my phone.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. I mean, but it's weird to other people more than me. I've known Trump for nearly 20 years. You know, I competed in the Celebrity Apprentice, the first season of it in 2007-8, and I won it. And I spent about 100 hours around Trump, I worked out later, in that season. And I was very informative, particularly in the boardroom filming scenes, which could last up to 3 hours. I saw a lot of the way Trump is over hours in the way he interacted with people. Yeah. And it always struck me there was a disconnect between Trump, the politician, and particularly the president, and the guy I saw in that boardroom. The guy in the boardroom was much warmer, much less combative. He liked mischief, and he liked stirring things up, and he liked drama, all those things. But he had a streak of empathy towards contestants and stuff, which I've never seen him show as a president. He believes that he's got to be strong man all the time. I think right now, because of the shooting and because of the scale of his win, which has basically knocked all his critics out, I think he's showing a bit more of that side now. The dancing on stage, you know, to YMCA. I mean, the ultimate joke, really, that the guy who's called the most bigoted president in history chose the #1 gay anthem
of all time
in history to sing on stage. And he's got America dancing the Trump dance, right? I see him laughing a lot more in public now, relaxing, enjoying dinners which are filmed and put out there. I see him doing a lot more interaction with people. I think, yeah, that's the guy I remember from Apprentice, the boardroom, when he did the McDonald's stunt, when he did the garbage truck stunt. And I've seen this really accelerate since he got shot. I think he's a changed man since then. I don't think he's going to lose the pugilistic side or the trash talking side or any of those things which are part of his DNA as a New York real estate guy. But I do think he's got that empathy streak he's always hidden is now coming out more. And I think he's a happier and more relaxed guy this time because we haven't seen what we saw in 2016, which is the mass protests, the fury, the venom, the visceral hatred from the mainstream media, the Russia collusion thing for years and so on. You take away that side and you take away the thing that Trump talks about in his book, The Art of the Deal, where he says if someone punches you in the face, you hit them back 10 times harder. And he means metaphorically as well as physically. And for the first 4 years of that presidency, he was punched all the time, and he reacted by punching. It became just basically a brawl between him and the media and his political opponents. This time around, there's not that same atmosphere.
He doesn't have to be as harsh. He doesn't have to be as defensive.
He's won. And he's had 4 years to think about what he did right and wrong the first time.
You had a couple of chats with him recently on the phone. What did you learn?
The last time he rang me this week, the week before Thanksgiving, the Wednesday of that week. And he said, Piers, it's Donald. He said, I was just watching you on TV and you were looking great. And I just thought, I'm going to call you and tell you. Now, I suspect that isn't actually what he was thinking. He just wanted to have a chat, but it's classic Trump. Immediately you're like, was I? And I was laughing. But we do have really good conversations. And he was telling me about all sorts of stuff, you know, Ukraine and Russia and his cabinet and so on and so on. He knows I'm not going to repeat that kind of stuff. But it was there'd been very warm conversations, very open. And I just sense in him that the shooting in particular, and then the big scale of the win, they've had a profound effect on him. You know, he's nearly 80. He doesn't have to fight an election anymore. He only has to worry about a legacy. You can tell from his cabinet picks, he's gone for people who are not establishment, because last time he chose establishment people who then basically, a lot of them did him in and probably were there to do him in from the start. This time he's got people who are ferociously loyal and in many cases have been very successful in their own fields, which are completely different. You know, we see WWE, right, as being a criteria for selection to his cabinet. But why not? I mean, why not choose people like that?
Trust really is everything when it comes to supplements. A lot of brands may say they're top quality, but very few can actually prove it, which is why I partnered with Momentous. They make the highest quality supplements on the planet. They're literally unparalleled when it comes to rigorous third-party testing. What you read on the label is what's in the product and absolutely nothing else. 3 of the products that I use every single day to support my brain, body, and sleep are omega-3s, creatine, and their magnesium L-threonate. When I take these consistently, I feel a massive difference in my cognition, my strength, and my sleep. Best of all, they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can buy it and try it for 29 days, and if you do not like it for any reason, they will give you your money back. Plus, they ship internationally. Right now, you can get 20% off everything site-wide, plus that 30-day money-back guarantee by heading to the link in the description below or heading to livemomentous.com/modernwisdom and using the code modernwisdom at checkout. That's livemomentous.com/modernwisdom and modernwisdom at checkout. What do you think happens if Trump is unsuccessful and doesn't make any positive change to America, given that he's got all of the things that you could want, electoral college, popular vote, house?
Yeah, there's no excuse.
But where does that leave American politics if you've had both parties have is there a lot of despondency that'll come down the line if that doesn't?
I think there'll be a lot of schadenfreude. A lot of people say, told you. I think Trump knows that. I think he's aware of the potential opportunity here, the chance to, in a way, have a second go at his legacy, because he had one go at it which ended catastrophically with the January 6th rioting, which was a shameful moment in American history, and that was on him. And I think that he was then sent to the wilderness. I wrote a column or two in early 2022 where I was like, this guy's finished. He's a busted flush. It's all about Ron DeSantis now. Back off, Don. I look at that now and think, wow, how has he got back? And he got back even stronger than last time. And actually, it's because the Democrats did a number of acts of self-harm. They went after him through the law, weaponizing the justice system, choosing ridiculously pathetic things like whether he shuffled paperwork over a one-night stand with Stormy Daniels 20 years ago. Who cares? Americans don't care about that. They care about the fact they can't feed their kids. They care about the fact nearly 10 million people have come over the border in the Biden administration 4-year period. That's what they care about.
It's that looking good over doing good thing again, right? Like optics versus...
I think it's also a visceral hatred of Donald Trump. It is, this Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing. I have friends of mine who are completely unhinged. I have family members. If you mention Trump, or if I post a picture of me and Trump with something, congratulations on winning again, utter mayhem.
It's like that Russian sleeper agent activation code.
Yeah. And I'm like, you got to sit back and get the bigger picture with Trump and understand why he's so popular.
I saw from The Hill that AOC is rumored to be running.
I mean, utterly absurd.
What do you make of her chances?
What a shrieking, even more progressive, even more far left candidate version of Kamala Harris. I mean, Trump, they must be rubbing their hands. Please give us AOC, because almost everything she stands for bears no relation to what Americans actually care about. Anything. So she would be the worst possible candidate. If the Democrats don't wake up, they've got to get rid of all this progressive left stuff. It's got to all go. They were at their most electable when they had someone like Bill Clinton, right? Go back to the Bill Clinton playbook. He didn't bother with any of that crap. He just kept it pretty centered.
What would you say to people that go, well, the world's different now? This is a different time.
It's not. We've been told it's different. We've been told we now have to believe the sky's blue when it's actually red. And eventually people have gone, well, hang on, it's red. Why have I got to call it blue? And people have gone, actually, no, I'm done with that, thanks. No, and I'm done with the constant offence that everyone's taking about absolutely everything. I'm done with everyone losing their jobs over the tiniest, transgression of the woke worldview rule book. I'm tired of all of it. I'm tired of identity politics. I'm tired of the ruination of meritocracy, of the altar of wokeism, inclusion. When it doesn't matter how good you are, it matters what your skin color is or your gender. None of that does anyone any good, least of all people from ethnic minorities, or least of all women. If you're trying to promote women's rights, I mean, it made me laugh in the election. Kamala Harris was, I'm for women's rights. Abortion. Okay, I agree with you. Okay, on that I agree with you. Because we in Britain, it's a settled issue. We just don't really have debates about abortion here. We have one of the most lax abortion laws in the world, actually. And I'm all in favour. I'm all for pro women having the choice. Nothing to do with me, Gov. You just decide, women, what you want to do with your bodies. All in favour of that. But how do you square being the candidate for women's rights when you're also supporting trans athletes in women's sport, as Kamala does? You can't, because you're eroding women's rights. And then people like J.K. Rowling, who put their head over the parapet, they get abused, not least by the Harry Potter stars who owe her their fortunes. And
Rupert Grint's got a 2.8 million
tax bill
to pay, so maybe he'll be back in a good.
Maybe that's penance, for being. I haven't seen his views about her, but I mean, a lot of them have been very scathing about her. And when I sit with them, I had a debate the other day with a guy called Ernest, who comes on quite a lot. He's one of our pundits, and he's a funny guy. We have good debates about stuff. He defends the indefensible most of the time, and I quite enjoy it. But he was talking about how you got to respect people's right to limitless self-identity. In other words, if you identify as whatever you like, I have to respect it. I'm, okay, fine. So if I identify now as a black man called Ernest, do you respect it? And of course, after about 10 torturous minutes, he had to admit he wouldn't respect that. So the premise of his argument was all complete bullshit. And I've done this before on International Women's Day a couple of years ago. I identified as a black lesbian. And people, when they first heard it, whoa, you can't use those words on the airways. Well, you can when you're having a debate on International Women's Day about whether gender identity should be completely limitless. And sexuality is a movable feast. And actual racial identities. We've seen some people who are black pretending to be white, or white pretending to be black. This has to stop. You have to actually get back to a fact-based society.
I wonder at the moment if the left-right distinction is breaking down a little bit. Because
no question.
Anna Kasparian is turning based.
Interviewed her last week.
Cenk Uygur, and Bernie Sanders are either collaborating with Elon or complimenting him in one way or another. So I really wonder,
Well, you're seeing a return to the centre. You're seeing, and actually most governments in American and British political history have pretty well been hovering around the centre. You don't really see extremities on either side. You don't see the far right or far left getting power, really. And it's the more centrist parties with centrist leaders who tend to have the most longevity and most success. And I think that's why I always say about Trump, people think he's extreme. He's not really. If you take away his rhetoric, then his first term of office, he was a pretty moderate Republican president. He didn't even go to war anyway, almost unprecedented for a Republican president. So, it's Trump's rhetoric is really 90% of the reason people hate him. But I think a lot of people this election went, you know what, I'm kind of done with that stuff.
Well, we see more optics than we do impact now. It is very difficult. No one cares about what the Fed's budget spending this quarter is and show me a spreadsheet, but they will care if somebody says something a bit lewd on a video.
Right.
Because that now is what you optimize for, over looking good, over doing good.
Right.
That's not to say that everything that Trump does is good.
But virtue signaling is a very insidious new scourge in society where you attach, I told a story in my last book about after the George Floyd murder, which I did a lot of stuff on, wrote very strongly worded columns about it, did a lot of stuff on air on Good Morning Britain, which I was hosting at the time about it. But there was a day when we were supposed to all do a black square on our Instagram, and I couldn't understand why. What's the point? And I went to my local squares in the middle of a pandemic, and I just had a bottle of wine. It was a nice sunny afternoon, and I'd forgot all about what I was supposed to be doing. And I posted a picture of my bottle of wine in the twinkling sunlight on my Instagram. And my sons all within about half an hour were, Dad, you got to take that down. I said, why? Dad, we're getting abused by all our friends and you got to take that down. I said, I don't understand. Why are you being abused? Because you got to do the black square down. I said, no, I don't. Why? To prove what? I've written column after column about the horrific murder of George Floyd. I've said hours and hours and hours of interviews with people about this on air. Do you think that meeting a black square is going to make any difference to the promotion of racial equality or correcting racial injustice?
What do you think would happen if the black square demand was made in 2024?
It wouldn't have anything like the same pickup. fact, it probably wouldn't even be suggested. People have realized these are vacuous, meaningless things, and that the moment that needle on the clock got to midnight, in came the Instagram influencers with all their, topless bikini slaps. It's like, whatever. Well, they couldn't wait. They were itching. Get me off this black square. It's killing my business, right? And so to me, it was just vacuous virtue signaling, the worst kind. It doesn't help anybody. But this kind of, on the back of it, the kind of bullying that goes on to bully people into going along with the herd, it's got to stop. It's like the taking my knee thing. I was completely in support of that. But I don't think people should be compelled to do it. It's a very interesting case in British football. There's a Northern Irish footballer called McLean, who comes from a little part of Northern Ireland in Derry, where Bloody Sunday happened, where literally people in his street were killed by British paratroopers in one of the worst incidents of the Troubles, and the British troops that day behaved appallingly. And he doesn't want to wear a poppy, which we wear to celebrate, Remembrance Day, because it doesn't just remember people in the world wars, it remembers all armed conflict involving British troops ever. And that includes Bloody Sunday in his eyes. And he said, I can't look at people in the eye in Derry. And all the time, every year, he gets the same abuse. And every year he refuses to wear it. And every year I'd normally post at some stage, why would we expect him to? Why should he be compelled to wear something which actually supports a group of people who, in that particular moment in Northern Ireland, killed his own people? And I don't think we should bully people like him into doing it.
It feels legitimate. This person's evidently got a thought through, very well-rounded, established,
good argument, which makes sense, but most people don't want to hear it. They just think, he won't wear a poppy, he's a disgusting disgrace.
You understand that is the progeny of people who are using these sorts of social campaigns inappropriately as well.
Yeah.
Because it causes people to have a reaction. The boy who cried woke, that you have this immune response that immediately gets